The Underneath, Part 1. Gaps. Natik, Adeena yelled, chasing after her younger brother. Slow down! The headstrong 8-year-old sprinted through the playground, dodging the other children as if it were his profession. Adeena tried her best to keep up, but the playground's boisterous other occupants invaded her space, slowing her down. She stumbled, almost collapsing to the ground, and straightened her hijab, growling in frustration. Natik, she cried, I'm gonna tell Mom if you don't get over here. As usual, her brother ignored her, smiling mischievously as he reached the playground's epicenter, a jungle gym twisted up in layers of climbing bars and tube slides and swinging bridges. He glanced over his shoulder at Adeena before crawling into the bottom of one of the biggest slides, a bright green plastic tunnel at least 3 times Adeena's height. No, that's the wrong way, Adeena chided, rushing to the bottom of the slide. But Natik had already disappeared, scaling the interior like a spider in its web. Sighing, the teenager leaned into the slide, calling out, Natik, answer me. The only response was her own voice, echoing back at her. Natik? She repeated, worry cracking her own voice. Silence surrounded her, stifling her as if the sounds of the other children had faded away. Concerned now, she pulled herself into the slide, applying pressure with her hands and feet to scale the angled tunnel. As she climbed, the silence grew more pronounced, and she wondered if the plastic had some sort of sound-muffling feature. Sunlight washed across her face as she reached the top of the slide, climbing out onto the top of the jungle gym. She stood up, brushing off her clothes, and looked around, but she saw neither Natik nor any of the other children who were there just a moment ago. Moreover, the playground itself seemed older now, more decrepit, as if it had aged a decade in seconds. Overhead, the once sunny sky was now covered in gray clouds, and Adeena thought she saw a dim, green light flicker like lightning within them. Adeena knelt down, running her finger across rust-covered metal. Natik, please answer me. A gentle breeze moaned across the playground, and Adeena wrapped her arms around herself. Is this a dream? She thought. Am I just going crazy? Across the street, amongst the rows of houses, Adeena saw curtains gently part, and a bony, bleach-white face with thin, bright red lips peered through the window. When they saw her looking back, they retreated into the house, and the curtain fell still. Hey, Adeena called. Can you help me? She hurried down the steps of the jungle gym, sprinting across the grass and onto the sidewalk. As she prepared to cross the street, movement caught her eye, and she turned to see a large, hulking figure approaching her. She paused, hesitant, and turned toward the newcomer. Excuse me, sir, she said, moving in their direction. Have you seen a little boy come by here in the last 30 seconds or so? He answers to Natik. My mom asked me to watch him, but he got away from... She stopped mid-sentence as the figure drew close enough to make out his features. Lumbering toward her towered an 8-foot humanoid rat, its features cartoonish, its matted fur covered in oversized street clothes. At first glance, Adeena thought it might be a person in some kind of elaborate costume, but its movements were too stiff, too erratic, like a wind-up toy in its death throes. Some sunlight filtered through the clouds, glistening off of what appeared to be a metal skeleton hidden beneath holes in the rat's fur. You are not registered, citizen, the rat creature boomed, its voice hollow and robotic, its mouth unmoving. Please provide identification. Identification? Adeena squeaked. I'm sorry, I'm not old enough to have a license. The creature moved closer, extending its furry hand. Identification is mandatory. I don't have any, Adeena yelled, backing away. What's going on? Registering unknown citizen as hostile, the rat creature said, its eyes lighting up red. Deploying countermeasures. It extended its arms, and metal claws protruded from its fingertips. Please remain calm during your execution. My what? Cried Adeena. The rat creature raised one arm, preparing to strike, and Adeena crossed her arms in front of her face, heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a small boy ran between them, producing 2 plastic cards. She's with me! The creature paused, its red eyes flickering back to black. It leaned forward, examining the 2 cards. Scanning. Recognized. 1 Ahab Vanderberg and 1 Marcia Vanderberg. Without saying another word, it returned to full height, retracting its claws, and turned around, creakily walking away. Adeena and the boy silently watched its silhouette grow smaller and smaller until it was beyond their sight. Once it was gone, the boy, Ahab, Adeena presumed, turned to her, revealing an angular, bleach-white face with thin, bright red lips. You have to be careful around Annie's, Ahab said, returning the 2 identification cards to a satchel slung across his shoulder. They're quite volatile. Are you okay? Adeena asked. Your face. Ahab laughed. Right. You just got here. Come with me. I've got a lot to explain. I can't go with you, Adeena replied. I have to find my brother. Why do you think I'm here? Ahab asked. Your brother's been taken. I'm trying to rescue him and many others like him. Adeena's eyes widened. Taken? By who? What is this place? Ahab looked around. Come on, let's get off the streets. We don't want to draw attention to you. To me? Adeena scoffed. Ahab motioned toward a space between 2 of the nearby houses. I know you don't know me, but I need you to trust me. We aren't safe here. He's just a kid, Adeena thought, probably no older than Atik. What harm can he do? Nodding, she followed him into the alley and they began weaving a path between the houses, cutting through yards and hopping over gates. Where am I? She asked as they walked. I know I'm not in the same place as before, but everything looks sort of familiar. You're in what my people call the underneath, Ahab explained. Our scientists theorize that your world, the overhead, and ours were once the same. One single world. But something changed a long, long time ago, and we became 2 halves of a whole. Connected, similar, but different. Wait, so you're saying that I'm not on Earth anymore? Adeena asked, incredulous. Ahab chuckled. Well, it's still Earth. It's just a version of what Earth could have been, compared to your world. And your world is what Earth could have been, compared to ours. 2 origin points, divided into different evolutionary paths. Different? Different how? Adeena inquired. Well, the plant and animal life here is harsher, more predatory. Weather patterns are more consistent. We don't get many deviations from this mild, overcast sky. Humans have developed differently. You pointed out my face? That's what everyone here looks like. Oh. Adeena averted her gaze. I'm sorry for being rude. It's okay. This is all new to you. Moreover, we underneath humans have different developmental stages biologically. In your world, in the overhead, children are born with very little intelligence or maturity or emotional stability. It takes both time and care for those qualities to come to fruition. What does that mean? What's it like here? Adeena asked. Well, in the underneath, maturity and intelligence are inverted. The younger we are, the better our memory retention, our social skills, our scientific aptitudes. In my world, we're all born as tiny scientists, slowly awaiting our mental deterioration as we reach adolescence. It's kind of like your world's Alzheimer's, but we spent the first decade and a half of our life painfully aware of its inevitability. As a result, all scientific discoveries and technological developments have been achieved solely by children under the age of 15, leading to some major differences in modern technology between the overhead and the underneath. Wow. Adeena stopped walking for a moment, trying to process what Ahab had said. So, what happens to the adults? Ahab glanced at her. Nothing good. Most become bitter, delusional, sadistic because of the adult-to-child ratio, and due to underneath adults' brutal methods, they have a stranglehold on our government and society. Most underneath children nowadays are forced to work on projects to fulfill the fantasies of psychopaths. Well, what makes you different? Adeena asked. Ahab sighed. My parents died when I was a toddler. I've been drifting, self-sufficient and independent, for as long as I can remember. I've been looking at this world from the outside, much like you are right now, and I see the things that conspire to tear apart both of our worlds in the shadowy corners of my own. He stopped at the next gate, holding up his hand so Adeena would follow suit. We're close to the highway. The roads are dangerous, but crossing beneath the bridges is the quickest route back to my home, where you'll be safe from the Annies and from other groups. Adeena nodded. I have another question before we go. Go ahead, Ahab said. You knew my brother was taken. You knew I'd be at that playground. How? Actually, how did I even get here? Did you bring me here somehow? That's more than one question, Ahab teased. But in regards to how you and Atik got here, it was an accident of sorts. You two fell through a gap. What's a gap? Adeena asked. Gaps they're like little holes, spots when and where the boundaries between the overhead and the underneath are weakest. Usually, they correspond with intentions, with places that people aren't intended to be. Under the bed, the back of the closet, behind the mirror. Recently, there was an incident where someone accidentally made it through a gap after being pulled beneath an escalator. In your case, it seems like you two traveled through a gap by crawling the wrong way up a slide. That can't be true, Adeena responded. People will be crossing over all the time. Well, gaps are fickle, Ahab admitted. They're inconsistent, often moving around intangibly. There are ways to predict or summon gaps, though. See, gaps aren't just breaches in space. They're breaches in time, in the ethereal energies that connect us. As such, there are moments and circumstances that make gaps more likely to appear. Anywhere close to the moment of a death or a birth, for example. Also, certain rare phases of the moon or symmetrical times of the day, as well as inactive broadcasts like radio or television static, or even the busy signal of a phone call that can't connect. These moments, in proximity to gap locations, can be enough for people or objects or animals to slip through sometimes. So, if we don't know they're there, it's hard for us to stumble through them, Adeena continued, realization dawning. Still, I can't believe no one in the overhead knows about this. Oh, I have no doubt that there are those in power in your world who are intimately aware of gaps, Ahab said. But the underneath is, in many ways, far more dangerous. Leaving us alone is likely the safest thing for your people to do. It's also why I came to pick you up as soon as I found out about you, and that you were coming. Oh, that's right, Adeena exclaimed. That was the other thing I asked. How did you know about me? About Natik? Like I said before, gaps aren't just in space, Ahab explained. They're in time. For some reason, despite all of our world's major differences, we remain linked in our day-to-day lives. When someone from the overhead gets hungry and makes a sandwich, their underneath counterpart often does the same. Inversely, when someone from the underneath, say, falls in love with a person, the same will eventually also happen between the same two people in the overhead. A car engine rumbled nearby, and Ahab tensed, looking around. When he continued, his voice dropped to a whisper. Those moments can be disjointed, though. The two sandwiches might be constructed hours apart. The two lovers might meet years apart. Because we in the underneath have spent centuries studying the gaps, we've found ways to predict moments in one world by observing moments in the other. We suspect that's where concepts like precognition and deja vu come into play. They're just side effects of people who are sensitive to gaps. So, Adeena hesitated. How long ago did Natik enter the underneath? For you, It's probably been seconds, Ahab whispered. For me, it's been about a week. A week? Adeena screamed, and Ahab waved his arms, shushing her. Who has been keeping him prisoner for a week? Faint footsteps sounded behind her, and she spun around to see 3 men standing about a block away, partially obscured by the shadows between the houses. She caught a glimpse of suits, of sunglasses, of faces covered in flesh-colored plastic. The men reached into their jackets, producing small objects that Adeena couldn't quite make out from this distance. They have, Ahab answered, his voice shaking. The sleep police. He grabbed Adeena by the hand, pulling her, and together they turned and ran for their lives.